We're talking today with Michael Alioto of Birmingham, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, Mike, can you start us off with some background, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born December 19th, 1947 at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. My family lived alternately back and forth between East Dearborn and the west side of Detroit growing up.
Okay. And how many kids were in the family?
Three, myself and two younger sisters.
All right. And family life was not easy, I gather.
Family life was, fairly normal. My dad, probably like a lot of people, had, a dysfunctional drinking problem, and it manifested itself not always real pleasantly.
Okay. What kind of work did he do?
He did just all kinds of different sales. He initially, when he got out, he was a fighter pilot in World War II, flew a Corsair for the Marine Corps. Got out and became an inspector for the city of Dearborn. And then between that point, and he passed away relatively young, 1973, at 52 years old. And he had multiple sales jobs from the 50s until his last job was 1969. He couldn't hold a job after 1969. He was 48 when he was kind of forced into retirement because of his drinking problem.
All right. Now, what kind of education did you have?
I went to 12 years of Catholic school in the city of Detroit. I went to St. Gemma Grade School, Dominican nuns, and I went to UD High School, which is now a boys' Jesuit school, Jesuit priests. And then after that, I attended, in no particular order, I attended Henry Ford Community College, Wayne State, Central Michigan, Arizona State, and University of Michigan.
Okay. Now, was the college all after Vietnam?
No, a little bit before it, and the majority of it after it.
Okay. But basically, so when did you graduate high school?
1966.
Okay. And then what did you do after you finished high school then?
Well, it was interesting because instead of just going to school, my dad convinced me that I could work full-time at Ford Motor and be able to do my homework on breaks and go to school full-time. And of course, if anybody understands the draft at that time, you had to take a minimum of 12 credits. Mm-hmm. And I remember my first semester, I took 17 credits, which no direction, no counseling, was way over the top, and also working full-time. And of course, it was almost an undoable task at that time.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, did you so you did community college first, or?
I went to Henry Ford initially, and I actually did relatively well the first year. I carried, I believe, it was a 2.58. Mm-hmm. With working full-time. It's, it wasn't shabby. I didn't have to kill myself to get reasonably decent mm-hmm. grades. In the second year, about the same thing. And then I was drafted. And what had happened, I still had a deferment. So I was drafted accidentally. And I called my draft board and I said, I've got a deferment. They said, well, it happens all the time. Just bring us proof of the deferment down here. I said, okay, I'll bring it down. And the more I thought about it, and life wasn't going swimmingly. I did not want to go to school to begin with. I was going for one reason, to avoid going into service. I'd had very good test scores. I'd always scored the top 1 percentile in these aptitude tests, mm-hmm. the SATs, etc. And so I knew if I went in that I would end up getting some sort of a clerical type job or some relatively easy job, and I'd coast through 2 years of military. I actually had applied to be in the Guard, and I was called around January of '68, and I turned them down, the Medical National Guard. I think it was out of Wayne, Michigan. I turned them down because I didn't want to go to training at that time. Mm-hmm. But once I got drafted, I thought, you know what, I'll put my 2 years in. Again, I'll get some sort of cake job, and I go through my 2 years and get out, and then I can go through life at my own pace.
All right. So when did you actually enter the service then?
June 26, 1969.
Okay. How much did you know about Vietnam at that time?
Well, it was, of course, it was up front and visible, and as a college student, I mean, all the kids were very, very aware of it. I would say that I don't know what percentage, but of course a very substantial percentage of kids were in school for one reason, taking 12 credits or more for one reason, and that was to avoid the draft. I mean, the big thing back then when I was a kid was that people joined the reserves, okay, 4 or 5, 6 months training, 6-year commitment, you know, weekend meetings once a month. People joined the Navy or the Air Force because they knew that there was virtually no chance of any combat wound going one of those branches, or they joined the Army and chose their own military occupational specialty, because you could do that. You could enlist in the Army for 3 years. If you got drafted, 2-year proposition, then of course you were stuck to the whim of what they wanted to do with you.
So did you understand much of why we were there in the first place?
It's interesting because my junior year in high school, one of the instructors, my history instructor, Mr. Tiernan, came in and gave us a 2-question test. He said, what is the capital of North Vietnam? What's the capital of South Vietnam? Now this would have been either the fall of '64 or spring of '65. And I can remember that, and again, there was almost no visibility of Vietnam in '64, '65. And I can remember thinking, God, I know one of them is Hanoi. So I wrote down Hanoi for both South and North, and I got a 50% on that quiz. But as far as knowledge, I can remember my dad, who was a pretty astute guy and very well read, telling me that I better be careful. I don't want to end up over there because it was a really, really tough war, kind of comparable really to a warm Korea, and that you know, you better be careful. You don't want to end up over there. So, you know, with all the background and all of your friends your age, everybody knew you. We had friends that were in the service, writing letters home and not liking it all that much.
Okay. So where do they send you for basic training?
I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and when I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, we took a bus down from Fort Wayne, Michigan. We got down there and they immediately herded a bunch of us, and I mean a lot of us. There may have been altogether, they came in from buses from all over. There may have been, God, I don't know for sure, anywhere from 200 to 400 of us, probably enough to make up maybe close to 2 basic training companies. They herded us into this big auditorium, and we did all of our testing right then and there, that night, before we ever went to bed. We've been up that morning since who knows when, 4 or 5 in the morning. It got down there, and now we were testing midnight, 1 in the morning for all of our aptitude scores. And I can remember when I got back, the company commander called me in a couple weeks later, and he said that I had the highest test score of our company, and our company was about 200 kids. And so I thought, well, that's a great deal, because now I'm a cinch to get a reasonably decent military occupational specialty. And again, so I'm very, very comfortable and very confident that there was no way I would ever end up in harm's way. Maybe I go to Vietnam, that was okay, but it wouldn't be a combat type of a position.
Right. Now, when did you actually do your physical for the Army? Was that back in Detroit before you went, or before that?
Down at my original physical was, as I remember, right around, I know you had to take your physical right about the time you were turning 19. They didn't draft you until you turned 19. You got your draft card at 18, but you weren't drafted till you were 19. And I took it at Fort Wayne, Michigan. In fact, I had 3 guys from my neighborhood, all about the exact same age, all got our notices to go down and take our physical, and we all went down and took our mental and our physical together. I think it was maybe November of '66 or something like that.
Yeah, all right. And when you went down there, were there people who were trying to find ways to get themselves disqualified for things?
I wasn't paying enough attention, but everyone that I knew that went down to take their physical, everyone, because again, it was, nobody really wanted to go. If they wanted to go, they could have enlisted. So if you were down there because you were subject to the draft, you didn't want to go, or you'd already been in somehow, some way, probably. And so a lot of people talked about their bad knee, their asthma, their high blood pressure. Guys took, in those days, there was a lot, there were various different types of speeds that kids took to, like quadruple coffee type of a rush, etc., and they pump that into their system to try and get their blood pressure up to, wherever they could get it, something much higher than the 120 over 80 that's, considered kind of normal. So yeah, there were a lot of people that, I didn't do any of that sort of thing. Don't know why, but again, I don't think I was ever concerned. As I mentioned, I got drafted while I still had a deferment, so I wasn't sure I was ever going to have to go anyway. I could probably keep deferments, and then again, if I did, I really felt that I'd end up with a real cushy job.
Okay. Now, what are the first couple of weeks of basic training like? After the test and stuff, what do you do?
Well, the first thing is, of course, it's somewhat intimidating that you're going to be with a bunch of kids from all over the country, and you kind of get an idea, Army, a lot of tough guys. Couldn't have been further from the truth. The company I was in the first platoon. They alphabetized the platoons. I was in the first platoon, and about 40 guys in our platoon at Fort Knox, and couldn't have met 40 nicer guys. We got along great together. It was almost like a bunch of kids going to a big high school class together. A lot of bright kids, not what I expected. It wasn't riff-raffy, it wasn't tough. I don't think we had a tough kid that you would call a tough kid in our platoon, so there were no bullying or anything like that. And it was, the training was demanding, and they really kept you going. A lot of your training and how much they pushed you was based on your company commander. There were companies, for example, that in a 9-week basic training situation, you might get 7 24 to 30 day weekends, or 24 to 30 hour weekend passes. Our company commander gave us 1. So we had a noon Saturday till 6 p.m. Sunday, 1 30-hour period off for the whole 9 weeks. Wasn't bad though, because again, the guys were nice that we were with. I went in June 26, so the weather was terrific. Never had to worry. I hate cold, never had to worry about cold. I don't mind hot, never have. So, and I played every sport, so consequently the physical rigors were nothing. And all in all, it was like being on a football team for 9 weeks.
How much emphasis was there on discipline and following orders?
A lot, but pretty much everyone did it. I mean, the 2% that chose to fight the system, drill sergeants know how to change that real quickly. And a lot of the way they change it, by the way, is if a small percentage of people are acting up, what they would do is they would punish everybody in the platoon other than the guys acting up. And of course, you can fill in the blanks. And that would change pretty quickly. They would get the hint, don't act up any longer.
All right. Now, what kind of facilities were you in? Were you in old World War II barracks, or were you in newer facilities? Or?
They were older. They were older but nice, clean. They had, all the toilets were just against the wall. An open shower. The barracks were just spick and span. They literally would do the white glove treatment when they come in for inspection, and they'd find a little, they go up 8 feet up the wall and find a little corner with a little bit of, dirt in it, and with a white glove rub their hand and go, dirtiest barracks I've ever been in my entire life. No weekend pass this weekend, that sort of thing. But it was all tongue-in-cheek, pretty good humor and stuff like that. So the barracks were Spartan, double beds, bunk beds. And they'd wake you up very early in the morning, and you'd go out in the compound and run around and do PT, and if it had rained the night before, you'd be doing push-ups in the water, in the mud, etc. And then they'd holler at you for being so dirty and send you back inside and say you're not going to chow hall until you're presentable. And of course, you go back in and put on a different pair of fatigues. Everybody had 2 pair of boots, and 1 pair had to be displayed all the time, and they put a red dot on one pair and no red dot on the other, so that you couldn't wear the same pair of boots every day, which meant that you'd wear one, get them dirty, and have to spit shine them. And so tough. These drill sergeants have been doing this for years. You couldn't trick them. They were too good.
Were there some sergeants in training who were very new ones, men who were getting practice before going to Vietnam?
Yeah, the most of the head drill sergeants, most platoons would have a head drill sergeant and maybe 3 or 4 helpers. The 3 or 4 helpers, some of them were career soldiers, but a lot of them were guys that just got back from Vietnam and had 6 months to go or whatever, and they found something for them to do in that 6-month period. The head drill sergeant, ours was a guy named Sergeant Rigdon. Looked like he could have been right out of the movies. The cord stood out from in his arms. He was a white guy from Kentucky. He'd had a couple tours in Vietnam. He was an infantry guy, so he'd had a couple of infantry tours. Hard as nails, and no nonsense. And I can remember when I graduated that he came up to me and shook my hand, and he said, "Alioto, you go home and you tell your mama you done her proud." So after 9 weeks of this guy giving you a tough time, at the end of 9 weeks they figure you paid your dues, and they were all pretty good guys. I mean, they were pretty funny guys.
All right. Now, at what point do you find out what you're going to do for advanced training?
Right when you graduate, the end of basic training, and then they line up in formation. You do your company around the parade yard. They've got all your battalion people there, etc. And there's multiple companies that are graduating the same weekend. It's a huge fort, huge installation, major basic training installation. And we got in formation, and they call out your MOSs, and they got to 11 Bravo 10. And of course, everyone stood there and crossed their fingers that they weren't medics or infantry guys. And I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think I'm correct about this, they only had called 8 out of about 211 Bravo guys. Now remember, a lot of the guys were RAs, in other words, enlisted. It was the summer, and there were some guardsmen and reservists there going through training. So how many draftees were there out of 200? It might have only been 60, I'm not sure. But the last name Alioto, the first one they called was Alioto Michael. And that was the first time that it hit me that rut-row, I don't want to be in the Army. Because up until that point, I was convinced that I was just going to coast through a 2-year tour. And so all of a sudden, the gravity of the situation hit. I got my orders to go. We flew down the next day to Fort Polk, Louisiana, which was affectionately known as Tigerland at that time. And everyone knew that if they went there, that their odds of going to Vietnam from Fort Polk were immense, probably 80–90%. If you guys went to Korea.
So you did get the 11 Bravo designation?
I did.
Yeah.
Right. Was not thrilled with it at all.
So much for being a clerk or whatever at that point.
Yes, exactly.
All right. And now describe what the camp and the training were like down at Fort Polk.
Well, Fort Polk, unlike Fort Knox, because again, now you didn't have, one of the reasons that basic training was so nice is that we did have a lot of reservists and guardsmen, guys that were in school. We did have a lot of guys that were smart enough to join the Army to pick their own MOSs. And when you got to Fort Polk, what you had in our company, again roughly 200, you had 200 guys, maybe all draftees. You had a lot of Southern whites and a lot of blacks, and this was the era of the Civil Rights Movement. There was tremendous, on the part of the blacks, tremendous hatred for the Southern whites, tremendous. And we had quite a few, and this was not uncommon in the Army all the way through the period I was there, we had quite a few civil disturbances. And it was, in fact, going through the rest of my Army career, no matter where you went, you were always counseled when you first arrived that, quote unquote, if you're going to this area, you always go in large groups. And basically it was code for if you went to any area where blacks hung out, A, don't, and B, if you do, large groups, because it could be quite dangerous. So when we got to Fort Polk, that camaraderie, et cetera, and everyone knew pretty much that they were going to Vietnam. So everybody was in, and they knew what they were going to be doing when they went to Vietnam. And of course, they all knew that there was a chance, as an infantry guy, that you could get wounded or killed, and a reasonably decent chance. So whether that be 10% or 12%, I'm not sure. I think something like 1 in 8, but whatever. So people were like clearly not happy. So it was a real antithetical experience compared to the basic training.
Mm-hmm.
So as much as I enjoyed Fort Knox, I disliked my Fort Polk experience.
All right. What does the training actually consist of?
It's almost replicating basic training. It's basic training. They almost prepare everyone to be an infantryman, knowing that the majority of them won't, but they give them their basics. You get to Fort Polk, and now it's all M16 and M60 and the laws and everything combat related. Mm-hmm. A lot of field medical stuff, a lot of night training, tremendous amount of night training. A lot of guys skipped all that stuff. It was more chaotic. It wasn't particularly well organized. Everybody figured out how you could be marching to the buses to go out to night training. After the first couple time, we realized that when they loaded us back on the buses at 2 in the morning, they didn't take roll call, they just loaded us. So a lot of guys, myself included, would be marching toward the buses to go out to night training, and as soon as you could, you turned a corner and took off with a buddy or two and went to the movie theater and watched a movie or something like that. So there was a lot of what they call affection in the Army getting over. Mm-hmm. Because so much of it was replication, so it was, you can only learn so much about, playing war out in the forest at night. And, they'd have these combat courses out there where they'd start you on a road and you'd have to go 3 miles through all these woods and stuff. And they'd have the enemy out there. These were seasoned cadre that were going to try and catch you, and if they did, mini torture you to see if they could get you, to give you something more than name, rank, and serial number. And a lot of us thought, well, there's a good way not to get caught, just don't even go out there. So that was, and it, by the way, it didn't impact negatively the experience of going overseas. They're really, again, Fort Polk was more replication of what we had done in basic training. So if you went through infantry, and you couldn't get out of anything during the day, so don't get me wrong, you didn't miss much. But instead of having a 9-week basic training, it was like having an 18-week basic training.
Right. Now, did they make efforts to sort of physically simulate Vietnam or replicate any of the experiences?
Fort Polk was very much. Fort Polk, because again, Louisiana, it was swampy. It was temperature comparable. It's very, very hot down there. And we did have 1 week of Vietnam, like a bivouac out in the field, etc. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting until it's like any job, whether you're an engineer, whatever the case may be. You can train for 4 years in college. You get to the job and you find out that you're going to use 2% of your education to perform this job. Mm-hmm. When you got to Vietnam as an infantryman, the first thing basically a couple of the guys that have been in for 4, 5, 6, 8 months tell you, don't say a goddamn word. Just watch what I do what I do. And then after you're over there for 30 to 60 days, you got it.
Right. Now, at Fort Polk, did they try to teach you anything about Vietnam itself or how to deal with the civilians? Was that part of the package?
No. It was just strictly getting combat ready,
okay.
As I remember it.
All right. And is this basically another 8-week session or something like that?
Yeah, 8 or 9 weeks, and it's, again, and they make it easier. We had a weekend pass every single weekend. I went into a little town called DeRidder every weekend with 3 guys, one from Royal Oak, Michigan, and 2 from New York. Good guys, and we went in every single weekend. It was the fall now, because I went down there around Labor Day, mm-hmm. and we went in every single weekend, stayed at a Best Western, 1 room, 4 of us, and screwed around, bought beer, and there was nothing to do down there. Bought beer and watched football Saturday and Sunday, and took a cab back to the base. That's what we did for 8 straight weekends.
All right. Now, once you finish that, is it pretty much straight to Vietnam?
It's supposed to be, but what I thought I would do is I thought that since I got my orders to Vietnam, I thought that I would try and go through a little more specialized training, and then when I got finished with that, then maybe they would reissue me new orders. Maybe they'd send me to Korea or someplace. So what I did was I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, for a little specialty school, which ended up being just almost another 9 weeks of basic training, etc. Because Christmas fell over that, I actually got they gave me a leave out of AIT. I got to Fort Benning, and about 2 weeks later we had a 2-week break for Christmas. So I actually ended up with about 40 days break. And then I got through at that specialty school, which was nothing big whatsoever. In March, they reissued my orders, Vietnam. So all I had done is put off the inevitable for 3 months.
Now, what was the specialty school for?
Oh, it was just, just a little more sophisticated combat training and things of that sort, just...
So it wasn't NCO school or anything like that?
No, I didn't go to NCO school, but it was that type of a thing, leadership programs and things of that sort, and I had qualified for it, and that's, so I thought, what the heck.
Now, did they give you any other kinds of offers? Say, if you sign up for a longer hitch, you can get this training?
Oh, they pushed me to be an officer for my entire training.
Okay. All right. Now, since you
but to add on to that, there were 3 OCS programs: artillery, which I think was at Fort Sill, engineering at Fort Belvoir, and infantry. And I had told them that I would extend for a year if and only if they would assure me engineering at Fort Belvoir. And they weren't looking for any engineering officers. So I thought, well, why would I want to spend an extra year is in the infantry? So I ended up just going over as a leg.
Okay. Now, once you did finally complete your training, did you get another leave home, or did they?
I did, yeah, I did. It was around Easter time. Came home and, in fact, got excited for a little bit because I was home, and we'd gone up north snowmobiling, and got a little reckless, a little crazy, and drove a snowmobile into a tree. And I got catapulted out, and my feet got caught up, and I thought initially that I'd broken a leg. And I lay there in the snow, hoping that I'd broken a leg, but it was just bruised, and so that was it.
All right. And then where do you ship out of to go to Vietnam?
Flew out of Fort Dix. We went from Fort Dix to Alaska, and I think we stopped in either Manila or Tokyo, and then we flew into Ben Nye Air Force Base, which is just outside of Saigon,
Right.
in a big holding area. You don't even know what division you're going to be attached to yet.
What time of day did you arrive at Ben Nye?
I think like if I had to guess, and I'm guessing at this, but I'm going to guess mid-morning to noon.
But during the day, middle of the day?
I think so, yeah. It wasn't at night.
All right. What was your first impression of Vietnam when you got off the plane?
How oppressive it was when I walked off that plane. The weather engulfs you, just totally engulfs you. But also the fact that it was very, very secure. You kind of think you're going to get off, start ducking, but no, it was a major Air Force base, and then they bused us to Long Bend, which is, I think, almost adjacent to that. And there you stay there waiting to get assigned to wherever you might get assigned, the Big Red One, or the 1st Air Cav, or the 101st, or Maricala, whatever it might be.
Right. Now, how long did you have to wait to get assigned?
Typically 3 or 4 days.
And what do you do during that time?
I go to the club every night, drink, play cards, pick a basketball game during the day,
So you're not getting any kind of general welcome to Vietnam orientation at that point?
No. It's kind of a cluster.
Okay, you're just killing time. Okay. And then on those few days when you were at the base, did they get rocketed or mortared, or was it just quiet?
No, just totally quiet. They had us pull guard duty at night on the perimeter, It was a scary experience as you look back on it now. Safest thing in the world, but remember the first couple days over there and you think that there's a gook in every bush. But actually, I mean, they weren't going to attack Long Bend.
Right.
But you don't know that, obviously. So, you know, it's kind of unnerving.
Okay. And then what unit do they assign you to then?
Well, you go out and you look at this big board every day to see if your name's up there. And I looked up and it said Alioto, and it said Phu-Bai, P-H-U-B-A-I. I didn't know what the hell a Phu-Bai was. So when I asked them, I said, what is Phu-Bai? You're not going to like it. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, that's 101st Airborne. And as I learned, and as Casey Stengel used to say, you could look it up, 55% of the casualties in the Vietnam War were in I Corps, and 25% in 2 Corps, and 15% in 3 Corps, and only 5% in the Mekong Delta. Mm-hmm. So the further north you got, the more dangerous it was, for obvious reasons, because at the DMZ, you had a North Vietnam over the DMZ access. And and up there you fought, you didn't fight Viet Cong up there, you fought NVA. A lot of them, a lot more of them. Found out Phu-Bai. The Marines and the 101st. You know, again, that was like the second I've been in the Army. First of all, go to the infantry unit. Now I got to be Airborne.
Right. Okay. Now how do they get you up to the 101st?
They used to take C-130, fly up there. I can't remember exactly where we landed. Probably somewhere in Way. There's a little Air Force base up there. I don't even remember. But right there, and then they bus us into, I think, base camps in the rear. I believe, or Camp Eagle maybe.
Camp Eagle was close to Phu-Bai, I think.
Okay, yeah, and we were in Phu-Bai, and I first of the 501st Battalion, and so they took us right there, and you just walked in and reported to the first sergeant, and the first sergeant sent you over to the supply, which was just in our little compound, just a couple buildings away. I went over there to meet the supply sergeant. I think he was a staff sergeant. He may have been an E7. I think he was an E6. And went over there, and they give you your gear. You go back, and the first sergeant says, tomorrow morning, we had a helo pad right there in our compound, and taken out to your unit. And our unit had been hitting quite a bit of combat recently, so they were really down in manpower. So they sent 4 of us out there to my new platoon, 2nd Platoon Bravo Company, 1st of the 501st.
Okay. And what sort of area were they in when you joined them?
You know, heavily mountainous terrain, A Shau Valley, or the contiguous area to the A Shau Valley. It was you know, a bunch of fire bases, and we didn't have an area of operation. We were a bastard battalion, so we moved around all the time. Every 3, 4, 5, 6 days they were moving us. But Arsenal, Catherine, Vagel, Bastogne, Kelly, Gladiator, Rakkasan, in that particular area.
All right.
Ripcord.
Yeah. What kind of reception do you get when you join the unit?
Poor. Everyone did, very poor. When I got off the helicopter, we had actually, our platoon was involved in a small firefight when I got off the helicopter. And the first words I heard from this guy were, not just me, but everybody getting off the helicopter, were, "Get down." And I just dove behind a log. And I don't think anybody approached me or talked to me for almost 3 hours. And all I could think of myself is, boy, if this is a daily occurrence here, how does anybody make 365 days? It's ridiculous. Now, this wasn't a daily occurrence. You don't have a firefight every day. But then, once they did come over and, you know, what's your name, etc., nobody was warm toward you the first. I think it's the immaturity of 20-year-olds more than anything else. I don't think it's because this was planned. And as a newbie, you don't get much respect. After 2 weeks, you're still not getting a hell of a lot of respect. After a month, you're just about there. After 2 months, you know, you're solid. You're a veteran, and you're part of. And I never lost that, because all new people that came in once I became, you know, kind of one of the platoon vets. I was really welcoming to all new people, because it was an intimidating experience. It was an uncomfortable experience. It's tough enough being over there. I had no appetite for the first 30 days. Not even just because of the nerves, but because the weather was dramatic. You drink so much water, it's unbelievable, because you're humping up and down these hills, and in the middle of summer, it was summer when I got over there, pretty much summer. And so that stayed with me, so I was very welcoming to new people after that.
Now, you get there the first day and so forth. Now, were you sleeping out in the field at that point, or are you going into a fire base, or?
We never went to a fire base ever. The whole year I was there, it was simply search and destroy patrols for the whole year. So we would get up. It was a 25-man unit. If we hit a lot of combat, we got as skinny as maybe 16. If we were getting replenished and didn't hit combat for a month, we'd get as heavy as 31, 32. But typical at 25 on average. And we would get up in the morning. We would hump up and down, and we would try and set up at night on one of the higher hills. And we would set up, it was all triple canopy jungle there, and you'd sit up on a trail, and you would ring your little 25-person group with light, flares and claymores, and you would set up a guard position at one end of the trail, another guard position at the other end of the trail. You'd have one squad at one end of the trail, but very condensed, very small little circle area. And then the guys would rotate. Say there were 9 guys in your squad. We'd all be sleeping by 8 o'clock, because you were tired when your head hit that ground. And we didn't dig it. We never dug in once in 1 year. It was digging into concrete. Couldn't dig in. And most nights didn't put up anything over your head. If it was pouring in monsoon days, and I'll get to that in a second, we would put little. We'd take each guy would take their little
A shelter half or poncho?
Yeah, and we'd make a tent out of it. He became expert at that. A guy would take the first guard at 8, and he'd wake somebody up at 9, and he would wake somebody up at 10, and he'd wake somebody up at 11. And then everybody start waking up in the morning as soon as the sun starts coming up, and you hear all the chirping in the woods and stuff from the animals. And you get up and, first squad, saddle up, and they'd leave their heavy rucks and stuff back with the second squad and the command patrol, and they would go on a patrol, maybe for 3 hours, come back at noon, eat, and then everybody would saddle up with all their equipment and make that same 3-hour journey. And we might get to, we typically would set up around 6 o'clock at night, again, on preferably a higher hill, and they were just search and destroy missions. Didn't know what we were going to find. If you found something, it was almost always accidental. And you'd get up there and you'd do the same thing again that you did the night before. And we did that for 365 days, and then every 7 or 8 weeks they would take us out of the field for about 6 days. Now this is our battalion, our platoon, our company. I can't speak for every battalion in the 101st, but I'm assuming that most of them did it comparably. But there was never Christmas Eve, they brought out a hot meal to us. That was one of 2 that were brought out in the year period, and that was just really bad mastacholi with no meat. I just as soon eaten sea rashes, believe it or not, it was that bad. The whole time that I was over there, they issued us 2 beers in the field for the whole entire year. That was Christmas Eve. We were supposed to have a ceasefire that day. I was selected or elected to be one of the couple guys from our platoon to go and see Bob Hope. And because we were in a bad area and we couldn't get a helicopter in, I wasn't able to get out of the field to see him. So that was disappointing to me because I was really looking forward to that. But you know, don't really care anymore, of course. But it was really repetitive, 365 days, and it was search and destroy patrols day after day after day.
All right. And then how regularly would they shift you from one area to another, put you in helicopters and move you someplace else?
Well, because we were the bastard battalion, frequently for us the first 6 months, and if I said that every 6-7 days, that wouldn't be an exaggeration. I must have, I'm going to guess that they moved us, oh God, it's a really tough guess. At one time I had tried to track that at one time, and it seemed like it was 78 times over the course of the year. It seems high to me even right now as I speak, but frequently. Mm-hmm. And the bad thing about it was because the only reason that they moved us so frequently is there were 13 battalions, I believe, with the 101st, and they would have us go in and support whichever battalion was getting the worst of it at mm-hmm. that time. So I think we were the bastard battalion for about 6 months, and then I can remember finding out the RTO started passing around one night the information that we were finally going to get an area of operation, and they gave us the AO of Firebase Birmingham, which was the cushiest area of operation that the 101st Airborne had. And it probably was a makeup for what we had gone through the first 6 months, because we certainly had the worst of it the first 6 months. And so we ended up being Firebase Beham for, God, I want to say close to 3 months. And even though we're out in the field, in the jungle, it was a piece of cake, total piece of cake. We saw very, very, very little combat, extremely a little bit of combat. Birmingham was a very large fire base, and we went up there and we stayed there once for 6 days, and it was like a vacation. Getting on a fire base to be an infantry unit that took over a fire base for a week as the infantry unit on the fire base, it was almost like a stand down. So any fire base that an infantry unit company got for 5, 6, 7 days, it was almost like a vacation compared to being out off the fire base and in the jungle. And Firebase Birmingham had these huge underground places to sleep, and they had this huge mess hall up there, and they had 175s, which is
big guns.
It's the only fire base I'm aware of that had 175s on it. And we even for Thanksgiving, they took us up there for Thanksgiving dinner. We had turkey and dressing, etc. And the only time I ever saw donut dollies and these girls from home that came over and played the games and all that kind of stuff.
So Red Cross girls.
Yeah, it was a real positive experience.
All right. Okay, let's go back to that, your kind of very beginning there with the unit when they're out in the field and so forth. Do you remember getting into your kind of first serious firefight? Or does they run together for you?
Yeah, no. The first one was immediate.
Yeah.
It was, we ran into a buzzsaw, and in a 4-day period, we had 13 casualties out of about the 25 guys, 3 killed and 10 or 11 wounded, and the majority of the wounded were from friendly fire. We dropped our own artillery pieces on top of our platoon. How that happened, I can't explain, but you're 4 or 5 kilometers away from a fire base. It's throwing 105s and 155s, supposedly in front of you, walking you up a hill, and if you're off 100 yards or 80 yards, it's not difficult probably to be off 80 yards. 3 guys were killed. And that was my first 4 days in the field. And math is my strength, and so it doesn't take much to figure out if you just lost half your platoon to wounded and killed in 4 days, that things, that doesn't bode well for you going forward. So that was actually, though, that ended up being, of all the combat I saw, there were probably only 3 or 4, maybe 4 combat situations that gruesome in my year over there. That was one of them. Happened to coincide with my first 4 days out in the field. And there were about 3 others comparable to that. We lost, in our platoon, wounded or killed, we lost well over 100% of our platoon, wounded or killed. And the math doesn't seem to work, but it does, because when you lose 10 guys, they replace 10 new guys. And interestingly enough, approximately half of our casualties were friendly fire. We called in, when I say we, I don't know who, but we called in mortars one time, and just whistled right. I mean, I still get a chill even thinking of the sound, because it was that on top of us. And in fact, that day that happened, there was a young guy who he died that day, and I was the one that was holding him and comforting him until he took his last breath. His name was Rick McCarty, and when I looked for him on the wall, I couldn't find Rick, and I guess his name was Earl, but he went by the name of Rick, and he was from the West. I think he was from Wyoming, and I know for years, and I've never done this, and for 40-some years now, I've considered calling his family and just letting him know that I was with him when he died, and telling him he was going to be fine. And it's interesting, because you watch movies and stuff like that, you don't realize it, but he was crying out for his mom as he was dying. So it's a strong urge, I guess, in all of us.
Right.
We go back to the fetal position in our moms, whatever the case may be. Okay. But I had 2 guys die in my arms. One I was with 3 or 4 other guys giving mouth to mouth to. He went in shock. I think he was from Indiana. Fairly new guy, been out in the field for a couple of weeks is all. And he hadn't acclimated yet. And I've always felt a little responsible for his death, because being a senior guy, I had told him to go down this hill and help out getting the water. And these hills were big, and going back up, they were tough. And one thing about, and you don't realize this, because I went through nine months of training and got over to Vietnam, and I wasn't in shape to hump those mountains for 30 days. It's brutal. And I was in good shape when I went in the Army, and nine months of training, and I wasn't in shape to hump the A Shau Valley and the mountains around the A Shau Valley. And so this guy was, and he got over there, he wasn't as good a shape as I was when I got over there. He was kind of a little bit on the pudgy side, if you could imagine. Maybe he'd had a couple months off before he got over, I don't know. But he was not really in great shape, and I've always thought, I was one of the people responsible for having him go down there and kind of bring all that water and stuff back up, and all of a sudden we were on patrol, and he went into shock, and he started pretending, bang, 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 there's NVA, bang, 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 bang. We thought that he was just making a jerk. We'd never seen this behavior before. We thought he wanted to get some sort of psychological deal out of it. And all of a sudden, he just lost it and started breathing almost like a fish. And the next thing you know, he was going. And of course, we, IVs and mouth to mouth and all that kind of stuff, and we just lost him.
So that was just essentially heat stroke or some...
Strictly, 100%, yeah. He was the only one that that I ever saw pass away, other than, wounded by, some sort of bullet, artillery round, mortar round, or something of that sort.
Right. Now, roughly when did you actually go out into the field, in terms of what month? So it's like April, May of 70, or...
Yeah, April.
Okay.
April. Mhm.
All right. And then there is, in the I Corps sector, there is a campaign that will develop starting in April, go on into July around Fire Support Base Ripcord. And there's
Right.
different units going in and out, but there's also a lot of action on surrounding hills and fire bases and
Correct.
stuff. And that, for that period, May, June, July, was pretty intense. A lot of things going on. Now, how close did you get to Ripcord or to any of that?
Well, you know, first of all, I didn't know Ripcord that spring, early summer. And we may have been, as far as I knew, a couple of kilometers away at different times. I just, you know, didn't know. We had flown into this LZ Kelly, where we saw a lot of combat and really bad weather. They got socked in by really bad weather. In fact, we couldn't get food in. Didn't need water. It never stopped raining. So you had plenty of water. But we got to the point where literally we were all out of food. And we were joking about, we had a scout dog up there, and there was a lot of jokes about that dog. And we got out of there, and they moved us out to down by the South China Sea. Only fire base I was ever around by the South China Sea. And they moved us out to, there were a couple fire bases called Tomahawk and Los Banos. And for 4th of July, they took us up to Tomahawk, and we had a big steak cookout. Tomahawk looked right out over the South China Sea. It was right there on the highway. And God, I remember, I swear to God, I'm not making this up, I think I ate like 8 or 10 strip steaks. Swear to God, it sounds like it can't be done, but I swear to God, I think that's how many I ate. And we were up there, and then this is 4th of July, and we were getting finished with Tomahawk, and I don't remember if we went back out to the field for a couple of days or not, but we finally went in for a stand down. It was our first stand down since May. So we got in for a stand down, and we'd flown in there, and I was when I was not in the field, I was a heavy beer drinker, heavy, you know, from as soon as I put one in my hand, you know, until I passed out, and a big time card player. And I remember we were about our 3rd day on about a 6-day stand down, and it was about 6 in the morning. It was about 6 in the morning, and somebody came in. I was still playing cards. And somebody came in and said, "Saddle up." One of the battalions was taking, you know, a huge hit. So I'm clobbered, totally clobbered, and got my gear, went out to the helo pad. We got on. I mean, it was just a chore to get out to the helo pad. We weren't supposed to be out of there for 3 more days, you know. So went out there. They flew us out to a fire base, probably not 4 or 5 kilometers away from Ripcord. And it was a fire base that was no longer in activity, called Firebase Gladiator. And so we got out there and we started rebuilding Gladiator. And I remember it's the first time that what woke me up to the seriousness of the situation is that it was the first time ever I had seen an officer out in the field, on the ground, above the rank of captain. And not only that, there were 2 generals. General, I believe one was Barry, and maybe the other one was Green, but I'm guessing, I'm stretching there, I'm not sure. And I can remember we were digging in, and these generals were walking around, and they came up to us, and somebody said, but most guys stopped and saluted, and I did not. I kept digging. And somebody said to me, I don't know if there was a colonel with them or a mage with them or somebody that said, you don't know how to salute? And I just looked at the guy and I said, I don't have time to salute right now. And one of the generals, I can't tell you which one, said, there's a smart soldier. And we didn't have time. And not only did we not have time, because I didn't know how little time we had, but later on that day, the Vietnamese started walking mortar rounds up our hill on Gladiator. I went to run into one of the few places that had been dug and was already so full of soldiers that there was no place to go. So I laid on top of that hill, in this barren hill, with them walking these mortars up. No cover, no anything. And I had a, I had a small book of the good, the bad, and the ugly. The book. And it was about an 80-page paperback. And I lay there to try and keep my mind distracted and tried to read pages of that as they were walking those mortars up. And I just kept thinking to myself, don't drop one of these things in my pocket. You know, whatever, please get, you know. But they didn't. They didn't hit our side of the hill. And we kept digging this thing. They brought out some heavy construction, some heavy engineering. We were blowing, with huge amounts of dynamite, we were blowing these huge tree stumps out. I can remember one got blown up, and it took up in the air. It was like a rocket up there, and kind of coming drifting towards where a bunch of us were standing. We didn't know which way to run. This thing would have killed us. It was huge, immense. And then we had a young first lieutenant. I can't remember his name. We didn't have him very long. Good-looking kid, younger than myself, and he was from the West. He might have been from Wyoming or Montana or one of these states also. And he went in, and all these lieutenants got together. They wanted one platoon to fly off and support Ripcord from one of the hills underneath Ripcord. And he volunteered us. And I can remember thinking, you know, and he said, the reason he did, he said, was he felt it was safer than staying up there where we were going to get hit every single night. Now, maybe he was right. I don't know. Frankly, I would have rather stayed there if I'd have had my druthers, but I didn't have my druthers. So we got on, and I was still carrying an M60 at this time. I carried an M60 the first 6 months I was over, and a 16 the last 6 months. And so I was still carrying an M60, and we had two 60s in our platoon. And we always, this was just normal, the first helicopter in always had an M60 guy and the medic, because if you're going to get combat, it was going to be there when you got there. And you wanted some firepower, and you wanted a medic. And we alternated. It was my turn to be first in. My ammo bearer, Wayne Carroll from Central City, Kentucky, and myself got on. The medic got on, and two other infantry guys, a kid named Larry Barrington from South Carolina, another kid from South Carolina. And we got on, and these guys, by the way, the two kids from South Carolina were relatively new, 3 weeks maybe there. And we got on the helicopter. We were going into wherever the hell we were going, and we got shot down. And we were just hovering to come in, and I can't tell you how high up we were. I'm going to guess 30 feet, but we hit, you know, it just dropped. It knocked the rotors off, so there was no hovering down. It just dropped like a rock. And there were a pilot, co-pilot, two door gunners, myself, the other four guys, and I was the only non-injured guy of the 9, the only one. And they couldn't get another helicopter in because that helicopter was laying there burning and cooking off ammo. And the medic was doing his best to help people, but he was injured. My ammo bearer, Wayne Carroll, was hurt severely. He had suffered a head wound, I believe. One of the props hit him. The one kid from South Carolina was wounded seriously. Barrington was wounded, but not as seriously. Because I didn't know the pilot, co-pilot, and the two door gunners, I never really knew whatever happened to those guys. I don't know if they died, lived, were hurt badly, or what. They medevaced everybody out other than myself. We eventually started getting other people from our platoon in. Wayne Carroll, my best buddy, never came back. The medic never came back. The one kid from South Carolina never came back. And Larry Barrington returned to the field probably 3-4 weeks later. I don't know. He probably went to some hospital there, and they patched him up, and he was back out there. So what happened then, and this is the bureaucracy of the service, even though we were in a horrible area, clearly, they didn't let us leave it. We had to stay there until a group from the rear flew out there, like an investigative group, to come out to see exactly what had happened. And it's kind of shocking. Here you are in the middle of a war. So what we did was we moved off that fire base up to the highest little hill, not Firebase, excuse me, landing zone.
Yeah.
Not very far from there, and set up that night. Now, knowing that the NVA know where we are, they just shot us down, not knowing how many there were. I didn't know that for 20 years after I got home. And we sat up there, and they didn't get anybody out there. So we went on patrols. The next night, stayed there again. Now, one thing we never did, that was the only time we ever did it the whole time, was we never set up on the same hill back-to-back nights, for obvious reasons. You know, I mean, eventually the NVA will figure out where you are. So you try and move every day. We stayed up there for either 3 or 4 nights, and this was during the siege of Ripcord. And so we were up there. Now, again, knock on wood, how this happened, we never saw another NVA after we got shot down.
Okay, now this tape is about up. Okay, we were in your story at the point where you'd had the helicopter crash and so forth, and you said basically after that original incident, you were not running into any more NVA in that
Correct.
particular sector. All right. So did they actually bring an inspection team out to go?
No, we stayed there for 3 or 4 days, and no inspection team ever came out. So if you remember the last line of the movie MASH, where the guy's truck breaks down or something like that, and he goes, "God damn Army." It's just kind of the Army, but you say it affectionately with a lot of love. But that's kind of the way the Army is in a lot of ways.
Of course, at that point, that's sort of middle of July now, and that's right when Ripcord was getting really ugly because the place was under siege. They might have been busy.
Well, they might have had their eyeball on a different target. And again, that whole area was so immense, and the triple canopy jungle was so incredible that they could be, if you were relatively quiet, 3 kilometers is only 2 miles. They could be, 2 miles away through that triple canopy jungle, and it'd be like being a state away.
Mm-hmm. Now, how much sort of, as you're patrolling these places, I don't know, how much did you actually encounter in terms of signs of the enemy or actual enemy troops, and how common was it, or what would you find?
Well, almost never signs. Once in a while, they were probably as good as we were as far as policing after ourselves. With this, it's just kind of when you go in the service, how you have police calls, and you get drilled for leaving a cigarette butt in the grass or something like that. Well, you're pretty regimented. All the guys are, and very responsible to yourself and to one another. And so when we'd set up at night and get up in the morning and move out, we would try and leave that place like nobody had been there. And I'm sure that the NVA were no different than we were. So no matter where we went, we very rarely saw signs. When we hit combat, it was because we walked into combat. Or because when we were the first 6 months, when they flew us into an area where somebody was getting hit, and we went in there to support them, and we're right in the middle of it, or whatever the case may be. So, the first 6 months there was a lot. The next 2-3 months there was very little, negligible. And then the last 3 months, we spent our time in a different part of the country, basically. They moved us up to the DMZ, which is a little north of where we had been, out of the valley, in the contiguous parts of the valley. We ended up going to Vandergrift and the Rock Pile and those areas, which were ugly areas because, again, close to the NVA stronghold. Of course, all of that A Shau Valley and that Ho Chi Minh Trail going through it were just NVA strongholds. We did some different things that we had never done before. We actually went on a patrol, an all-night patrol one time with just 6 of us on the edge of the South China Sea, just south of the DMZ. And we saw something very, very interesting. We saw a bus, looked like an old school bus, come across the DMZ. looked like about 40 NVA get out. They weren't that far from us, probably, I don't know if they were a half a mile or if they were a quarter mile. It was dark. We were laying down. We had a starless scope with us, the only time we'd ever carried a starless scope, which magnified everything and it kind of filtered out things. You could see pretty well. And I guess we could have lit them up and seriously maybe killed 20 or whatever. We made the judicious decision to, they weren't heading in our direction. If they'd have walked right towards us, I don't know what we'd have done. Spit the bit. But they didn't. They headed off. I can tell you, they headed off to the west because they had walked away from the where the South China Sea was towards Laos, a long way away, and never saw them again. But it's interesting because when you are in an area like we were for 9 months, 10 months, that you really acclimate to it and it becomes a comfort zone for you. So even though the areas that we were in the last couple of months may have been not quite as dangerous, they weren't as comfortable for me. Because again, I had acclimated so well to triple canopy jungle, to setting up every evening, to going on the every other day patrol, packing up with the whole platoon every day, etc. And I can tell you that after about the first 2 months over there, after a month over there, I considered re-enlisting to get a different MOS. And after 2 months, I would have never left the guys. And after 2 months, I can honestly tell you I was never really uncomfortable the rest of my tour. I was very nervous and uncomfortable the first month. Didn't eat well. I've mentioned that already. Upset stomach often. But once I acclimated, it's like anything else in the world. Believe it or not, you can acclimate to war.
Okay. What sort of leadership did you have within the platoon? I mean, did they have lieutenants who rotated in and out? Or?
Yes. Yeah, you had a first Louis. It's an excellent question because a lot of people would not realize this. There were 3 types of officers: Officer Candidate School officers, West Point officers, and ROTC officers, ROTC officers. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, OCS officers were all 10s. Unbelievable. They're just unbelievable how they had prepared these guys. Tremendous. West Point officers were mediocre at best. And of course, you would never think that. I think most people would just automatically think West Point, but they didn't have the same serious training that the OCS guys did. And ROTC officers were a joke. And rarely did one end up in an infantry unit. The guys would have probably run them right out. They had no idea what they were doing. They weren't prepared. They came over from the States not prepared. Very little training, out of shape, didn't understand basic combat at all. But we had officers rotated more quickly than enlisted men did. We had, I can't tell you how many first Louis that I had. We only had one at a time, but I think we had maybe 5 first Louis in 12 months. So we never had one for 6 months or anything of that sort.
So did they get wounded or just rotate out for other reasons?
Rotated quickly. Rotated quickly. More so than enlisted men, for sure. But I can honestly tell you, we never had one that wasn't pretty good. And it was also interesting that by the time when I got over there, of course, we had one that I can't remember who it was even, and he was there when I got there, and he was pretty experienced, it seemed like. And then once he left and it started getting replaced with brand new guys, every one of them was smart enough to go to the squad leaders, sergeants, veterans, and just help me out here, work with me, guys. And none of them were the type of guys that said, "I'm a Louis, I'll take this." They deferred to which they should have. It makes all the sense in the world. You can't take a young guy, same age as you, just because he's gone through various training back in the States, come out and you've been out in the A Shau for 6 months, and this is his first day. They couldn't even walk. I mean, they trip, fall. They get as winded as the next guy, you know, because you know, they're carrying the same stuff that everyone else is. So it's a chore for the first month to be able to get up and down the hills, let alone lead a platoon. Now, they were smart guys, and they did a good job, and they with the maps and all that kind of stuff. But all in all, the leadership for the first Louis, I would say, was excellent for my whole year.
And a lot of the leadership, though, is really getting provided by the sergeants, the squad leaders, or
Anybody who'd been over there 3 months or longer, and it didn't matter. We had very few E6s.
Yeah.
E6s, you almost had to be kind of a guy that had been in the service for very few 2-year guys evolved to E6.
Right.
A couple guys did, but yeah, once you had a guy in there three months, whether he was an E4, an E5, or an E6, a new E6 out to the field, a guy who'd been in the Army for 6 years coming out to the field, first time ever as an infantry guy, around 2 E4s who'd been there for 6 months, that E6 deferred to those 2 E4s because it doesn't take but a second to realize that you don't know what the hell's going on, and these guys do. Yeah. And these guys might very well be just as bright. They just only been in the service a lesser period of time, that's all.
How would you characterize morale in the platoon?
Phenomenal. Really phenomenal. Guys were great. Got along wonderfully well. You'd have petty arguments. You certainly never had anything physical, ever.
No, were you racially mixed? I mean, were there black guys in there? Was it all white? Or?
It was you know, primarily white. It's my understanding from what I've read that black infantry, black combat soldiers made up a lesser percentage of combat soldiers than they do the general population of the U.S. A lot of the blacks that went into the military, if they went in the Army, they joined. Actually, they probably had more experience than a lot of the white kids in that a lot of the blacks that went in had uncles, cousins, etc., that had been in the military, and they kind of knew the ropes, like you don't want to do this, you don't want to do that, etc. So we had never a large percentage of blacks in our unit. We may have, if it got up to 30, there were a couple times we may have had 3 or 4, but for the most part, we'd have 2 or 1 black kids. And of course, out in the field, everyone got along wonderfully well. They could go back in the rear area and all of a sudden didn't know you. There was, you could, outside of being in the field, you could always feel the tension. It was there. It was the time, you know, late 60s.
Now, could Northern whites, if they were smart, navigate that a little bit better, or was the racial divide such that
it depended? That's a great question. My own background working on the assembly line, when I went to work at Ford Motor, in some of the areas I worked at Ford Motor, it was literally some of the plants I worked at. I worked all over the Rouge and the Wayne Assembly. And some of the plants and some of the areas I worked in were at literally 50-50, 50% black, 50% white. And since doing that for a couple of years, growing up in Detroit, playing a lot of sports, playing a lot of basketball, but playing a lot of pickup ball in Detroit with blacks and whites, it was not an unusual experience for me at all. But the majority of northern white kids from the suburbs, etc., had zero experience with. There might have been 2 black kids in their school, and you know, the 2 nicest kids in the school, blah 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 blah. But they had never been in an area where there was large percentages of blacks, and so a lot of a lot of the white kids from the north didn't know how to handle it, and they would make the silly comments about, yeah, one of my best friends in high school was a black kid, and that did not resonate well with blacks. They saw right through that sort of thing. They saw that you were, sucking up to them and all that kind of stuff. So, you had to be, you had to kind of know what you were doing. As far as the blacks go, I can remember in training one specific situation when I was in training. We had a couple black guys come up to a white kid who was a guardsman during his training. Okay, he wasn't a 2-year draftee, and they came up and they said to him, "You're a guardsman from forget what state in the South, aren't you? And he goes, yeah, yeah. And they were real friendly to him. And they said, well, let me ask you a question. What do you guys do down there, you guardsmen down in this state? Now this is coming after all this posing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this guy goes, well, you know, I mean, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, the one guy says, all right, you guys kill niggers, don't you? And of course, you know, what they were getting very mean-spirited with this guy. And of course, this guy was really taken aback. And everything they were doing was very purposeful and intimidating. And so you had a lot of that. And I guess you could, if you dug deep, you could understand it. Young kids, immature, a lot of hatred, whether you feel it's deserved or not. I never frankly thought it was deserved, especially if you were drafted. I always felt if you got drafted, you weren't any more silver spoon than the next guy, or else you wouldn't have been there. But there was that, anybody who doesn't realize that, I mean, that was definitely an overtone of that whole period. No question about it.
All right. One of the other kind of stereotypes about the whole Vietnam experience has to do with the presence and the use of drugs. You were in a unit in the field, so what did you see or not see in that area?
Yeah, it was, and that's something that I've always hoped that the American public understands, that this idea that the American combat soldier over in Vietnam was out there hallucinating out in the bush or whatever. In 12 months, I never saw an incident, not one, of anybody ever utilizing a drug. I would go so far as to say that I would bet that no one ever did use a drug in the field. And there was a sense of responsibility you had. You couldn't possibly be high and do what we were doing. If you stumbled into, we never knew day to day if we were going to run into combat. Couldn't imagine one person in a unit being high and then getting half the people killed. And everybody knew it, and everybody was responsible to it. Now, when we went in for a stand down, about every 7 weeks, there were guys like myself that, as soon as we got in, went to wherever you could get beer. And then there was a group of guys that went wherever you could, you know, get whatever. Weed was the most common, obviously. The blacks, by and large, were more getting high. But there was a real overlapping group of whites also. The whites kind of went both ways, 50-50. So, some of the blacks were drinkers. Those were the guys that I became closest to of the black group because I was a drinker. I got along with all of them, by the way. But the drug situation was almost restricted to the rear area, which was where the bulk of the Vietnam soldiers resided. You know, there wasn't a huge percentage of people that went over there that were out in combat situations. And I don't think that our country ever will understand that.
Right. All right. Now, how much did you actually see of Vietnamese people themselves? I mean, you have scouts with your unit ever?
We had scouts almost all the time. We had 1 or 2 or 3. As far as other Vietnamese people, again, the war that we fought, the 101st, we were up out in triple canopy jungle. I never saw a village in combat, ever, once. So where we were, nobody lived. Hadn't lived there in hundreds of years. It's my understanding it used to be 400 years ago a worldwide hunting area.
Yeah, it was essentially a national forest area, or much of it was.
Yeah, and there was no possibility of, if you saw life, it was either an American soldier or an NVA. That's all. There was nobody else bebopping through those woods. And so as far as my familiarity with the people, when I was in the rear area, you know, we had a lot of Vietnamese people that were little helper bees back in our rear areas, whether it be Phu Bai or Evans or Hotchmuth or whatever, Eagle. And I will tell you, by and large, I got along great with them. They were nice, friendly, bright, witty, could kid with them. I truly liked them a lot. They were, I mean, the Vietnamese people are very gregarious, enjoyable people.
And did you have concerns that any of the ones, say, working on the bases or things like that were,
No.
early VC or anything else like
Nah,
that?
I never did, and maybe should have, but I gotta tell you that our experience in the field was so strong that anything getting out of the field, literally, if you said you're going on vacation to Florida for a week, it was a bigger kick to get out of the field after 7 weeks and get back to a base camp for 6 or 7 days. More enjoyable, a better respite than if someone said they're going down to Florida and taking a break for the winter. If you could compare the two, truthfully.
Now, did you ever get R&R?
I did. I was very fortunate. I went to Bangkok. Halfway through, I split my tour up. Halfway through, and I went to Bangkok. And not only did I go to Bangkok, but I got lucky because they had 7-day R&Rs or whatever, and I got one of these anomalous R&Rs, and it was a 9-day R&R, so I got an extra 2 days. And then that was September, and come January, we got a new first sergeant. And we were in on a stand down, about to go back out in the field. I had a couple more months to go in country. And this new first sergeant came up to me and he said, my last name was Alioto. There was a song out a few years before that called Alley-Oop by the Hollywood Argyles. When I got over there, the guys started calling me Alley-Oop and they shortened it to Oop. And for really my last 10 months, everybody in the whole company, battalion, knew me as Oop. And I was more visible than most guys, for whatever reason. I was just a visible person, pretty outgoing. I like people. This new first sergeant came up to me and said, "Oop." He said, "Have you been on R&R yet?" And as soon as he said that, I thought, well, he just doesn't know. And I knew the record keeping was shabby back there. In fact, I've always wondered how they even knew who was awarded a Bronze Star, who was awarded this, who was awarded that, because it was just lax, really lax. And he said, "Have you been on R&R yet?" And so, I formed a complete thought in 1/100th of a second, and I said, "No, Top, I haven't." And he said, "Well, you only have a couple months left in country." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "Well, you planning on going?" And I thought, well, I'll drag this out a little bit and make it look sincere. And I said, "Top, I hadn't really even thought about it." And then he said, "Well, your best buddy, my new best buddy had become a guy named Mike Riney." And Mike, I'd started, you kind of hooch together every night, and I'd been hooching with Wayne Carroll. Don't take that the wrong way. And then I started hooching with Mike Riney, and Mike was from Hannibal, Missouri. Really bright guy, really smart guy. And he said, "Your buddy Mike is going to Hawaii here, and we have an extra allocation." Because Hawaii wasn't the demand spot was Australia, but you had to wait 9 or 10 months to get it. That's why I went to Bangkok. I didn't want to wait 9 or 10 months. Hawaii was, some of the married guys wanted to go, but besides that, it wasn't a real in-demand place. And I said, "You know what, Top, that sounds like a good idea." So I went with Mike to Hawaii, so I got a second R&R. And Mike was going to Hawaii in hopes to talk his wife, who had sent him a Dear John letter, in meeting him there. And it's something that might be interesting is that there were quite a few married guys that I served with, my age. Most of them, I for sure married a month before they went over, because they were in love with love, immature, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Wanted her to be home when they got back, all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I think that over half of them received letters from their new wives. Mike received one, and she just said, "Mike, I don't want to be married any longer," et cetera. So I flew to Hawaii with them, and we got there, and we got a hotel room. Guy gave us a really nice hotel room for $5. And we got there. We went to a payphone, and he called his wife. And he called his wife, and she wasn't home. She was living with her parents. He says, "Mike, she's up at the Hannibal Bowling Alley. She bowls in a league." So he called can I get the number? Yeah, called the number. She came to the phone, and he said, "I'll pay for you to please come out. I want to make this work." And these guys were lonesome. I mean, I was lonesome for love. but I wasn't married, so I didn't have a significant. I would have been dating a lot of different girls, etc., but no one I was in love with or whatever. And she said, "No, Mike," she said, "I'm not going to come over." And then within about a minute, she goes, "I can't talk any longer. I'm up." Now you have to put this in perspective. Mike went over the same time I did. He's been over in Vietnam for 10 months. He's an infantry guy, and his wife, who he's still married to, couldn't. I'm not going to bowl this game, guys. I'm talking to my husband. I can't talk anymore. And by the way, there's no way to talk to your relatives and family from overseas. I mean, they did have those Mars radios, but you couldn't even find them. And if you did, you talked military jargon, hi Jim, over. Hi Mike, over. Well, try and get your mom to figure out how to say over at the end of everything she's going to say. It's impossible, right? So that stuff doesn't work. But I made one Mars call last over there. It was actually humorous. But anyway, so Mike, who was an inordinately strong guy, much more strong for his size than I was. He slammed the phone down, slammed it and slammed it and slammed it. I won't tell you the language he used, but he called her a bitch and every adjective in front of the word bitch you could imagine. And then he ripped the phone off, however it was, bolted to the phone booth and trashed that thing. And of course, what do you say? I don't know what to say. I got no idea what to say. This is a new experience for me. And so we took off, and of course he's in a horrible, horrible, horrible mood. He's in love, he's mad, he's hurt, every emotion. I'm there, and all I want to do is I want to find the first girl that I can find who's good looking, and hopefully strike up a conversation or whatever that means. Whatever you take that, wherever you want to take it. And so we go to this bar, and it's a bunch of young kids, a lot of service guys, but a bunch of young girls and stuff. And we go in there, and there's 4 girls sitting at the table. We go over there and start talking to them, and it is working. And I can tell that these girls are interested, and I've already forgotten about Mike's dilemma. And Mike asked one of the girls, what are you doing here? And she says, well, my dad's stationed here, Major so-and-so or Colonel so-and-so. And Mike just went ballistic and screamed and ranted and raved and blew my deal. And then we went back to our hotel room about 3 in the morning, passed out. And the next thing I know, somebody shaking me on the arm, and Mike had gone out and bought me a prostitute. She weighed about 300, a black girl weighed about 320 pounds. And I looked up, I thought, oh God, Mike. And she said, your buddy bought me for me, sweetie. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm just not interested, but thank you very much. But then we spent the rest of the week there, and we did a lot of drinking and stuff like that, but it didn't work out for Mike. And then when he went home, they did. I've actually talked with him a couple of times the last 40 years, and he remarried, he has 3 children and all that kind of stuff. That one just didn't work.
All right. Now, one of the things you had mentioned when we first talked, and that was that you had a shot, at least for a moment, at getting yourself a clerical job rather than being actually out in the field. How did that play out?
Well, it played out poorly. In fact, one of the names, if you look at the Ripcord, one of the 101st deals, I see Randy Shaner there all the time. And Randy was from Baltimore, Maryland. And when I'd gotten to the first of the 501st Bravo Company, there was a black first sergeant, and he interviewed me. And we really hit it off. And I happened to have the highest test score of all the guys in our company. And Randy was getting out of Vietnam, I think in July or August. And he interviewed 3 guys. Mike Riney, the guy I went to Hawaii with, was one of the guys he interviewed with me. And he interviewed me, and he said, you're going to be my next company clerk. So as soon as Randy leaves, now I was back in the stand down in May, which meant that I had basically 2.5, 3 months of infantry duty. Most guys only served a half a year out in the field. Most guys got rear jobs. So we went out, back out to the field, and we were flown out by this, they called it, I don't know if it was Firebase Kelly or whatever. It really wasn't a fire base. It was a hill. It used to be an old fire base probably, and we had a lot of combat out there, and we got socked in by some heavy duty monsoons. Couldn't get out of there, and they couldn't fly us out. And finally, after a couple of weeks, they flew us out, and they flew us down to some lowlands. You could be, it's like even any place you go in the world, up over the mountains, it can be horrible weather. As soon as you get down to the extremities, sunny and 85 degrees or 100 degrees over there, I guess. And they flew us down there, and they told us to, take our boots and socks and stuff off and dry our, because we never took our boots off. If we were out there for 2 months, we never took them off. Because if you got hit at night, you can't have your boots off, right? So, so everybody had jungle rot in their feet so badly. When I got home, it was a year before I started, when I took my shoes off, I would take them outside and leave them outside because my shoes stunk so bad. It was unbelievable. I couldn't get it out. It was just horrible. And so when we went down there, they said, dry your feet off, dry your boots off, because we've been soaked for 2 weeks and hadn't been under any cover, slept underneath the rain, just poured on you while you were sleeping. It was, it's another thing about being an infantry guy. Even if you're not fighting, it's not always the most pleasant. If the weather's bad, it's horrible. If the weather's good, it doesn't matter. So we went down there, and they had the company medic, who was a higher ranked guy, walking around. And he started looking at feet, and he looked at mine, he goes, my God, that's the worst case of trench foot I've ever seen. And as a matter of fact, I didn't have trench foot. They had been laying out there all day, they got sunburned, and he didn't recognize the difference. So he sent me into the rear area. Now, I didn't know that he was wrong about it. I didn't know much about trench foot. Didn't know anything about trench foot. And he sent about 3 of us in there, and we went in the rear area. We went to see a doctor the next day. The doctor says, there's nothing wrong with your feet, they're just sunburned. So I went back, and the first sergeant said, well, go back on the helo pad and go out and catch up to your unit. And I thought, and I knew that the disorganization back there was immense, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna just go, I know a lot of guys back here, and I'm gonna go to one of the clubs and spend a couple of days back here, having a few beers, and nobody's gonna know, nothing will be the worse for wear, and I'll just pop back out there in a couple of days instead of tomorrow. I'll take a 2-day weekend type of thing, right? And what happened was, I stayed back there a few days, had a good time, and went to the helo pad, flew us out to where we were supposed to be, which was around Fire Support Base Bastogne. They took us out there right to Bastogne, where our company was supposed to be. We got out there, none of our company was there. They had been called off because remember, we were still, our AO, we didn't have one. So they'd been called off to a hot area, and I wasn't with them. This is not a good thing. I was nervous. They caught me up to them a day or 2 later. Nobody said anything. Yeah, I was pretty well liked in the platoon, and I was a good soldier. So, if I'd have been a bad soldier, probably people would have, but I was a good soldier. Well, when we eventually got to this Tomahawk, which I referred to earlier, that first sergeant flew out there, and he called me to talk with him. I thought I had escaped all this. And I'll never forget his quote because it just stuck with me because I knew that I only had about a month to go before I was done with the war. I was going to be there for another 8 months, but tall cotton. And I went in to see him. He was a little hooch there on this fire base, and he goes, I remember he wagged his finger at me and he went, Alioto, he said, you were the apple of my eye, the apple of my eye. And he said, and now, he said, you're not going to be my company clerk. And it hit me, and I thought for 2 days, I traded 2 days for 8 months more in the field. And if something would have happened, I would have said, what a horrible thing. But the fact that nothing happened was probably the best thing ever happened because I was a better guy in the field than out of the field because I didn't believe in authority. I would have just gotten in trouble the next 8 months. There's no question I would have gotten. I'd have been talking back to people, all other kind of stuff. So as it turned out, it was probably about the best thing that could have happened.
And you mentioned that at a certain point you went from being an M60 gunner to just carrying an M16.
Right.
How did that happen?
Well, you just can't carry that thing forever. Just beats you up, just wears you down. It's too heavy. And when I first went out there, there was a kid named Dan Faison that was carrying it. And he said to the lieutenant, he said the next time a big guy comes out here, he's going to get the 60. And I wasn't big. I was 6'4", but I didn't even weigh 200 pounds. And so he could get through the 60 at me. And then I actually transferred it off 6 months later to this stocky kid from Houghton Lake, Michigan, J.J. Schaub. And he was a country farm boy that was big, thick neck, nicest kid in the world. I've actually got up to see him one time years ago. And Michigan hillbilly, nice kid, funny kid, and I passed it off on him, which was made the rest of the year a lot more palatable because it's so easy to carry that 7-pound rifle around instead of that 30-pound 60 because you carry it at the ready. You don't carry it over your shoulder. You carry it like that, and it beats up on you.
Okay. Now, when you look back over the time, out there in the field, are there other particular incidents or firefights or whatever, things that kind of stand out in your memory that you haven't brought into the story yet?
Oh, really, there was only like 4 or 5 really major incidents. My first week out there, where we, hit a lot of combat.
Right.
Kelly, where we probably lost about 8 guys, I think, out of 25. Getting shot down outside of Ripcord, where we lost everybody on that bird, other than myself. When we got up north and we were up near the DMZ, we lost about 10 guys out of 25 one day, all friendly fire, 100% friendly fire. And then near the end, when we went up to Rockpile and Vandergrift, et cetera, we had multiple killed up there at that point. So other than that, it was just light skirmish here, light bump into something there. I mean, you couldn't have a strong combat situation once a week. Nobody could live through it. Nobody could endure it psychologically.
Yeah. Were you ever in situations where you had the Vietnamese trying to probe your positions or send sappers against you, or because you moved around so much you didn't get that?
No, but never once. Never once. Again, that's why, referring back to that, when they wanted to investigate what happened to that helicopter, that was the only time I can think of where we ever set up in the same spot more than one night. So yeah, we were fluid. We really moved around.
Okay. All right.
If we ran into, if we hit combat, it's because they ran into us or we ran into them. It's not because they knew we were there or we knew they were there.
Now, did you ever wind up in kind of the middle of any sort of bunker complexes or seeing kind of developed enemy positions or things like that?
Sure. I mean, while they were already gone.
Yeah.
Yes. We'd take a hill and it would be obvious that there had been a big complex up there. You found, the latrines and the various underground cavities and things of that sort. We never ran into anything that you'd see on television that were immense field hospitals or immense kitchens or anything of that sort. Nothing of that size, but...
Did you find supplies or things they left behind, or did they manage to usually clear out?
Nope. They were good at policing things just like we were. They took everything with them but the kitchen sink.
And the latrines.
Yeah, that's right.
There you had mentioned off camera an incident involving discovering some of those up on top of the hill. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, well, we finally took this one hill. It took us 4 days to take it, and one of the guys that went up, his nickname was Country, nice kid from Alabama, and he was the first one up there, and he deposited some grenades in a hole, thinking there might be some Vietnamese down there. Instead, it was a gook shitter, and the thing just exploded, went straight up in the air, and just completely covered him in crap. and it was May, and it was summer weather. I'd say 95 degrees, and he had no ability to get this stuff off of him. All we had were canteens. He eventually, we went down a day or two later. We kidded him. Nobody wanted to be around him. We joked about that, you know. A couple days later, we got back down in near, you know, the base of a mountain, and there was a pond there, and he was able to clean himself off. But that was, he was, by the way, one of the guys that I went out of the field with when I took that extra 2-day vacation.
All right. See, now, when you're out there in the field and so forth, are you normally eating C rations, or do you get anything else aside from that?
80% C rations, 20% LERPs. I carried Tabasco sauce with me around the clock. Everything I ate was drenched in Tabasco sauce, and I tried to eat primarily beans and meatballs and beans and hot dogs.
All right. Were the LERPs any better than?
Actually, I thought they were pretty good, but you know, I mean, you put some cheese in them, and you put some hot sauce in them, and the spaghetti LERP. The only LERP I ate, I almost stuck with 3 meals my whole tour if I could get them. You know, we'd get resupplied every 4 days, and we would take turns taking our meals. And if there was a beans and balls, I took it. If my next turn around there was still beans and balls, I took it. If there was an extra one, I'd take it. And we carried, because we got resupplied every 4 days, I carried 8 meals with me. And I carried 13 quarts of water. And so I carried almost 100 at full load. And by the resupply, probably down to 60, because I think a quart of water was around 2 pounds.
2 pounds, yeah.
And I carried a big 5-quart Bolivet, and I carried 4 different canteens.
Would you do anything to kind of, was the water, did it taste bad? I mean, was it, if it's coming from the
I
Army?
just drank it. I didn't care. I never took any of those tablets. They would come around. The medic would come around and give us those malaria pills and all that kind of stuff, and I had no interest in taking it. I never took any of those things. I never took water purifier or whatever. When we ran out of water, and there were some times that we ran out of water frequently, and if we were up on top of a mountain and the only thing we could run into was a dirty mud puddle, we filled every canteen up with that water and drank it. Never thought twice about it. When you're that thirsty, you don't think about it.
And you managed not to catch any interesting tropical diseases.
I don't know anybody in our platoon that ever caught one.
Now, did you ever get injured in the field?
I got nicked with one of our own artillery pieces. Very, very, very little nick. And other than that, never fell down, broke anything, or anything of that sort. We had multiple guys that were injured in the field, going up and down mountains, falling down the mountain or tripping over or whatever. One guy broke his back. We had a guy break his back or neck getting out of a helicopter, because sometimes when we'd come in, and they would hover sometimes, if it was really a hot LZ, they would let you know, we're only going to go down about 3, sometimes 4 feet. And if you were in that elephant grass, sometimes it seemed like it might be 3 feet, it might be 6 feet.
Yep.
And one kid jumped off, Dwayne Pepper, as a matter of fact, and the rucksack came up and snapped his neck, and he actually broke his neck. Now, it's not as serious as it sounds, because it was one of those broken necks that isn't a serious broken neck. And he was back out in the field in about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So it was, when you say broken neck, probably just a little bone got broken or something like that.
Cracked, but not broken all the way through.
Yeah. We had one big black medic, nice guy. They called him Brother Buku, because the word Buku means a lot. And most of the black guys went by Brother Ben, Brother so-and-so, whatever. It was just kind of the time. And this medic, who was, again, he was just almost a sweet personality. Huge guy, my height, 270. And we were going down a mountain, very slick trail, and he lost his balance, and he went down this mountain and took everybody in front of him out like bowling pins. And it was actually, you hate to laugh, but I was behind him, and the next guy behind him, and it was actually comical as he was going down. I mean, it was just, you know, you laugh at, you know, gallows humor, I guess, but he went down there. He never came back out. He got hurt pretty severely, a big guy like that going all the way down there. And he was taking little trees out and everything else. So.
Now, were you keeping track of your days in the field? Were you counting down until you got to leave? Or?
I never counted down. I knew what the date was, and I knew that I had 10 months to go, 9 months to go, 8 months to go, 7 months to go. But yeah, that's heavy on everyone's mind. Everyone is very acutely aware of how short they are.
Did they send you out of the field before you were done, or were you out pretty much at the end?
Well, they didn't, because I had that little problem. So what happened was they sent me out 4 days early, and I went to process out. And when I went to process out, the guy said, well, they got the wrong timing here. You have 3 more weeks in country. And I went back to the base, and I told the first sergeant what happened. He said, we'll go back out on the helo pad. And I said, well, I'm not gonna. No. I said, I'm done. I said, the war's over for me, buddy. And he goes, no. He said, you're going. I said, no, I'm not. He said, well, I got nothing for you to do around here. And I said, well, find something. I don't care what it is. And they gave me a job escorting prisoners down to Da Nang. So I went out there. They gave me a 45. I put it on. I went down out to the helo pad with a prisoner, Vietnamese prisoner. Got on a helicopter. We flew down to Da Nang. I had met some guys down there from my previous R&R, because we had a couple days before we flew on an R&R. I met some guys from Port Huron, Michigan, in the Air Force, beautiful brick billets, etc. I went over to see them, and I stayed there for the next 2 weeks. And I flew back, and I got back, and the first sergeant said, where the hell have you been? I said, I couldn't get a helicopter back out. I knew he wouldn't know. and he said, Alioto, get the hell out of here. I hope I never see you again. And that was it, and I came home.
Now, how much time did you have left in the service then when you left Vietnam?
Not much. I got out. I got home in March, and I got out in August.
And what did they do with you for the last few months?
I spent at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. They initially sent me to Germany for 2 months, Bamberg, Germany, and then they flew me back home, and I spent about 6 weeks at Fort Sheridan, Illinois. And
what were you doing in Bamberg?
well, I didn't have the, they sent me over there, and I got over there, and I had been relatively highly decorated. And they had all my paperwork there, and this guy was processing me. He was just an enlisted young man guy like myself. He goes, wow, he said, we don't see anybody come through with this kind of stuff. And I had multiple Bronze Stars and multiple Air Medals and Army Commendation and things like that. And he said, wow, he said, God. And I said, well, what am I going to do while I'm over here? He said, well, we send you out, and you play war, almost like basic training, or AIT rather. And I said, can't you find me a rear job? And I said, some job in the city where I can, I said, I just did this for 12 months. And the guy said, let me see what I got. He said, would you be willing to be an MP? I said, sure, that's fine. So they sent me up to Bamberg. I met this lieutenant we had there. He was a black lieutenant. And we talked, and he said, here's the thing. He said, you have to get a German driver's license before you can pull any duty. And he said, they only test every 3 weeks. And the next test was coming up in, I don't know, a week or two. And he said, so study this, because you got to pass the exam. I said, okay, sure. So I went back to my room, and I thought to myself, is this guy kidding me? I'm going to be here for 2 months, and he's telling me if I don't pass, I can't do anything. So I went and took the test 2 weeks later, and I flunked the test. And I came back, and he goes, like he thought I was the one who was going to be disappointed. He goes, you can't do anything until you take the test again, 3 more weeks. I said, I know, Lieutenant. I said, I'll really work hard to pass it. So basically, I got up every morning, went to Chow Hall, hung around, read, went to the movies, watched movies, and at night with 3 or 4 other guys that I got to know. I actually went over there with a buddy of mine from Michigan, Dave Fox, and we'd go out at night to one of the nice local bars where we get something to eat. And the people loved us. The German people love Americans. I mean, if there's any country that treats Americans great, with the Germans, unbelievable. You'd think just the opposite, I flunked the exam. The next time I took it, I spent 2 months in Germany. I had a 2-month vacation in Bamberg, Germany, and never pulled a single day of duty. Then I flew back here to Detroit area, and then went to Sheridan. Didn't have a car, so on weekends I actually hitchhiked home from just north of Chicago. Well, you know that area. And just bided my time, and then got out on the 24th, and got on the 24th, and my dad said, you know what, why don't you take a week off before you go back to work? I thought, it's kind of my life here, take a week off. And sure enough, I got off the 24th of August, and I was back working at the Rouge the day after Labor Day. So,
all right. Now, did you have any trouble readjusting to civilian life after all that?
I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. If I drank too much, sometimes I'd be a little obnoxious with some of my best buddies. Maybe a little resentful that I really didn't know anyone else that had gone through and had that experience. So, was it horrible? No. Did I have some nightmares initially? It was kind of funny, but my first night home, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I moved into one of my sister's rooms, and they had a styrofoam head with one of those falls on it. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I saw this head, and I just thought it was an enemy soldier. And I just started hollering, and my folks came in, both of them, and there was, so initially it wasn't horrible, but it was something, but I would say I acclimated to it. It's not that I was always mean, don't get me wrong, but if I got drinking, I would get sometimes a chip on my shoulder about the whole experience, but I don't think that lasted much more than a year.
Did you get any sort of negative reception from people when you came back?
I didn't get a negative reception. I got picked up hitchhiking from Fort Sheridan one time by 6 or 7 long hairs, and they actually couldn't have been nicer, but they said, what do you do? I said, I'm in the Army. You go, wow, man, is that tripping? That sort of thing. So that was kind of funny, but they certainly weren't nasty. What I will tell you is this, that I flew home from Vietnam, got out at Fort Lewis, Washington, flew home, and one thing in the 2 years I was in, at any airport, nobody ever offered to buy me a Coke or a beer, which I still think that's a shitty deal. When I got home, I hitchhiked home from Metropolitan Airport, and a guy was going about a mile from where I lived, and I had everything with me. And he knew I was a GI, and he wouldn't bother driving me the last mile. I walked with that heavy pack all the way home, which was a pretty heavy pack. We had a home west side of Detroit with a milk chute. You could just slide my arm through and open up the door, went downstairs, took a shower, put civilian clothes on. My mom worked up at the corner, went up at the corner, told the secretary there that the guy that she had met the night before in the bar was here to take her to lunch. And the secretary got on the phone and goes, Dorothy, there's some young guy, and she's whispering, there's some young guy here that says he met you at the bar last night, and you're supposed to go to lunch with him. And my mom worked up on the second floor, and she came out, and she saw me. I thought she was going to tumble over the fucking, my folks didn't know I was coming home. They didn't know. They had expected me about 3 weeks earlier, and they had a cake for me that was in the refrigerator for about 3 weeks that had gotten home. But I think for me, it's not that anybody treated me poorly. It's just that no one ever gave you any positive acknowledgement other than my family was phenomenal. Both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side, both were phenomenal. And my youngest sister gave me membership to the VFW for Christmas that year. And I can remember going up there for a beer, and it was all World War II veterans and myself. I went up there and I sat and I had 2 beers, and I'm 21, 22 years old, and they're all 50, and not one person came over. In fact, they almost looked at me like, you don't belong, you haven't earned it. And I thought, I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I probably saw more combat than any of you guys sitting in here. And that was the last time I ever went to the VFW.
All right. Now, tell me just a little bit about you said you have a career track. You go back and you're working at Ford there for a while.
Right.
But eventually you kind of shift gears entirely and do something else.
Yeah, I got drafted. I was working at the Rouge for Ford Motor. I got out of the service, went back to work at the Rouge. I worked at Ford Motor off and on through 1978. Went through the oil embargo, got laid off during the oil embargo, went out to Arizona State and went to school. Got back out in 1978. 1976, I met a guy in a bar. It was a coincidence. Gives you a theme of my life. He was a lot of education, gone to Wharton School of Business, UPenn, and he was had been recruited to Detroit to work for National Bank of Detroit. Ended up leaving there, went to work for Merrill Lynch, ended up leaving there, went to work for E.F. Hutton and became the #1 young gun in the state of Michigan for E.F. Hutton. We kind of hit it off, and after a couple of years we became roommates, and he pushed me for about 3 years to do what he was doing, but I had no self-confidence. My sales ability was limited to selling newspapers, and golf balls, and things of that sort. And I had never taken any business courses. Econ 101, Adam Smith supplying to me. And so he finally pushed me into taking an interview. I went and took an interview with his manager, and the guy said, "I'll hire you, but 2 months from now I'll hire you," whatever that meant. And so I told Terry, he said, "Come back in 2 months." And Terry said, "Well, why don't you interview over here in Troy, same firm, with Mel Borak?" And I said, "Okay." So I went out there and interviewed with Mel. I borrowed a dress belt, borrowed dress shoes, and borrowed a tie for the interview. I had a sport jacket and a pair of khakis on. And I went in there and sat down with Mel, and Mel said, "What's your sales experience?" And I told him, "Newspapers, golf balls." He said, "How'd you do selling newspapers?" I thought that was kind of a funny question. And I said, "Well, I won every contest that we ever had for the Free Press." And he said, "Well, I want you to take an aptitude test." You took, and the aptitude test consisted of, in a 3-minute period, doing 100 addition of fractions, as many as you can. They gave you 100 problems. And a really good score would be like 50 or whatever. And I answered all 100. And then they had another test: write as many words that you can, up to 100, that begin with the letter T, in 3 minutes. And so as soon as I sat down, I thought T-O, T-W-O, T-O-O, T, just all the little ones you could, all that rhyme, and I just went like that. I did over 100. They sent the thing in to New York. He called me back in a week or so, and he said, "Well, they're going to hire you." He said, "Here's the problem. They don't think that you can make it in sales." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And they said, "Well, because your analytical test is so high." He said, "Frankly, Mike, they've never had anybody max out both those tests." And I said, "Well," I said, "I can tell you." I said, he said, "They don't know if you can work with everyone." I said, I've just spent almost 10 years in the Army or working at Ford. At Ford Motor, a lot of the jobs were 50-50 white-black. Got along with upper management, got along with the workers. In the Army, I got along with the Southerners, the Northerners, the blacks, etc. I said I went to a all-boys Catholic high school where it was 50% wealthy and 50% middle class. I got along with both sides. Hitchhiked to school both ways for 4 years. Got along with all the people that picked me up. I said, I can do this. And then as it turned out, and of course I would have had no way of knowing, the attrition rate is huge. Only about 10% of the people are still in the business 4 years later. And as it turned out, I ended up becoming the #1 guy in the firm. And that was just, obviously it would hit my skill set. I literally would not have known it. I had no real confidence that was going to be the case. I had hoped I'd be very successful and make a 6-figure income someday. No brag, I happen to just exceed that by a lot. And so I've had 2 different lives. I've had one that's very white collar and professional and fortunate and travel all over the world, and one that was very blue collar and both equally rewarding.
All right. And how do you see the military experience fitting into that? I mean, did you take something out of that helped you move forward, or was it just a piece of your life?
I think tremendously. I think tremendous my year as an infantryman, made me extremely secure in myself. I mean, I was relatively secure anyway, but I was undaunted by anything. Nothing fazed me when it came to, could I do something? There was no question in my mind that, yes, it's, I've said to a lot of people say, God, how could you endure a lot of combat for a year? And my answer to that is that our parents must do a great job raising us. The military does a tremendous job training us, and you acclimate to anything in life, anything. So I knew from going through that experience, if we can acclimate to that and come out of it thinking that, you know, would I do it again? Yeah, I would do it again if I was 20 years old.
Right. So why would you then be intimidated by the prospect of going into business career? Just
because I had no background in any of that sort of thing. I mean, that's if someone said to you, you're going to go out and you're going to sell stocks and bonds. I didn't know how to spell the word stock, let alone know what it is. So it's not. Did I think that if somebody said, you know, go and work for Mrs. Smith over here and sell tomatoes and bananas, etc., could I sell people that? I think I could. But if I couldn't explain what a stock was, I'm going to sell it. I didn't realize that the training they put you through is so immense. It's more than a 4-year degree in economics. I hire a lot of young people now that have worked for me over the years. I've had a lot of people that have worked for me, and there's not one of them that won't tell you on any given day how much of your college degree do you use in this, and the degrees in finance and business, etc. And they will tell you on any given day, the max you'll ever hear is 5% and the minimum is 0. But I didn't realize that at that time, that basically this is an OJT type of job like any other job. If you become an engineer at Ford Motor, because I worked in experimental engineering for a while, I didn't know anything about engineering, and I sat down and the manager of the department said, you don't need to know anything. You work with Joe over here. He's been here 35 years. You do what he tells you to do. And you're equivalent to any of these kids coming out of school with an engineering degree. They're never going to use what they have anyway. And the same thing in my industry. You come out with a business degree, you never use it in the world of stocks and bonds. You don't use it.
all right. Clearly, you made it work. And this tape is about out, and I think we're about out of interview here. So
Okay.
I'd just like to close by thanking you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, Jim, thank you very much.
All right.